Good holy everyone! I am Salvi Joyce Baquiel and we are going to report about Thorndike's Connectionism together with my co-reporter Ron Ken Arca and Norhani Bangon. Before we are going to discuss what is Thorndike's Connectionism, let's talk about who is behind this theory. So who is Edward Lee Thorndike? Edward Lee Thorndike was born on August 31, 1874 in Williamsburg, Massachusetts and died on August 9, 1949 at the age of 74. Edward Thorndike was the son of a Methodist minister and grew up as a very successful student. He graduated with his Bachelor of Science degree in 1895. After earning his PhD in 1898, Thorndike briefly took a position as an assistant professor. In the year 1900, he got married to Elizabeth Moulton. He took a job as a psychology professor at Columbia University, where he could continue to teach for the rest of his career. He was elected president of the American Psychological Association in 1912 and became one of the first psychologists to be admitted to the National Academy of Sciences in 1917. During his 55-year career, he published about 500 books and articles. He applied animals to the human educational experience and was once the leader of this field. He is best known for the law of effect, and he was often called the father of modern psychology. He is also best known for animal research and trial and error theory of learning. And now, the next discussion will talk about Connectionism Theory.
Now, let us move on to Edward Thorndike's Connectionism Theory. Connectionism theory is the result of the work of the American psychologist Edward Thorndike. This work led to what we call Thorndike's laws, and according to these laws, learning is achieved when an individual is able to form associations between a particular stimulus and a response. Thorndike said that learning is all about responding to a stimuli. In his experimentation, Thorndike wanted to study the learning process of human learning, but because of the lack of subjects, he turned to animals, such as rats, cats, dogs, and chicks. So, although his original experimental subjects were animals, Thorndike clearly expressed his intention of applying his work to human learning when he said, "The main purpose of the study of the animal mind is to learn the development of mental life down to trace, in particular, the origin of human faculty." As I said earlier, in Thorndike's view, learning is the process of forming associations or forming bonds, which he defined as the connection of a certain act with a certain situation and resultant pleasure. So, if the association formed between the stimulus and the response are good, the behavior towards responding to that stimuli will be repeated if the result involves pleasure. So, common example of stimuli and response is you are hungry, and because you are hungry, you eat some food. Okay? So, by eating some food, you will satisfy your hunger and you will also receive pleasure. Through that response or that behavior that you made will be repeated. To understand further about the function of this theory in learning, let us move on to Edward Thorndike's theory in learning.
Okay, good holy everyone. Now at this point, we are going to discuss to you guys the basic idea of connectionism according to Thorndike. So I will be discussing to you guys the three primary laws. So according to Thorndike, actually he said that these laws were originally the outgrowth of the experiment in the field of animal psychology. But unfortunately, because of lack of subject of human, it ended in the animal psychology kasi nga walang nag-asta na mag-volunteer bilang maging part ng experiment na yon. So I will be discussing to you guys the three primary laws. So the first law here is what we call the law of readiness, or also known as the action tendency. So in here, in this particular law, it stated that a series of response can be chained together to satisfy some goal which will result in annoyance if blocked. So if in this particular law, that one example to that is his famous experiment to cat. So let's try to imagine yung pusa na natrap sa isang cage. So maghahanap, the idea is here in the law of readiness is maghahanap ng paraan yung pusa na paano lumabas, especially kapag merong pagkain sa labas. So talagang maghahanap yan ng paraan kasi let's say for example, gutom na yung pusa at takam na dun sa pagkain na nasa labas, maghahanap siya ng paraan para makalabas. So the key here is that this law suggests that learning takes place when an action tendency is aroused through preparatory adjustment. What do we mean by that? So when we talk about that, it means a preparation of action. So if we put it in a classroom setting, let's try to put it in a classroom setting. If one child is not actually prepared to learn, well, then learning cannot be automatically instilled in him. Diba kapag ang bata is maraming mga environmental factor na maghinder sa kanyang learning, is of course hindi talaga matututo yung bata because that will serve as parang doon kasi madadivert yung attention ng bata. So hindi siya makaka-focus doon sa mismong learning. So hindi talaga mag-o-occur yung tinatawag dito nating learning, kumbaga tinatawag natin. And that is what we call the law of readiness. So the second one here is the law of exercise. So in here naman, the law of exercise is that the connections become strengthened with practice and weakened with practice is discontinued. So in here, as what I have said, his famous experiment to cat, that the more experiment was repeated, the more efficiently and quickly the cat was able to produce the desired outcome or the response. So what do we mean by that? If yung pusa is talagang inuulit-ulit niya yung pindot, yung let's say for example yung button, tapos alam na ng pusa na kapag pinindot niya yon, inuulit-ulit, tapos makakalabas siya at makaka-receive ng pagkain, yun na yung tinatawag nating law of exercise, because he or she, the cat, keeps parang inuulit-ulit niya yon na pindutin kasi nga parang makaka-receive, alam niya na makaka-receive siya ng pagkain kapag pinindot niya yon. So in here, this law suggests that the more practice, it helps in increasing efficiency and durability of learning. So if we put again in a classroom setting, if we do some exercise, diba, as a future educator, if we do some exercise, the more the child become proficient in the subject. Let's say for example, kapag you are doing or conducting some exercise, ano bang part ng English? Let's say for example, subject-verb agreement. So if you keep on doing that subject-verb agreement, talagang mahasa sila doon. So, and that is what we call the law of exercise, the second law. So in the third law of exercise, the last law, is what we call the law of effect. So in here, in this particular law, the responses to a situation which are followed by a rewarding state of affairs will be strengthened and become habitual response to that situation. So according to Thorndike, he said that rewards for appropriate behavior always substantially a strengthened association. So in the other hand, if it gives some annoyance to the learners. So again, kapag ang pusa, inuulit-ulit niya yon, it becomes habitual na kapag ginawa niya yon, pinindot niya yon, inuulit-ulit niya yon, talagang feeling niya, makaka-receive talaga siya ng tinatawag nating reward, kumbaga. So, kapag, let's say for example, may napindot yung pusa na it cost him, parang nalagay siya sa peligro or nasaktan siya, talagang hindi niya yun uulit-ulitin. So, the concept here guys, kapag, diba, kapag masaktan tayo, diba, hindi na natin uulitin yung bagay na yun kasi nasaktan na tayo. So, the concept here is that, the implication here is that teacher should make an environment that is, of course, enjoyable as possible. So, one way of doing that is, of course, by praising your students. So, of course, for those students na talagang gumagawa ng kanilang best para ma-praise lang ng kanilang teacher. Of course, you are obliged to praise them kasi nga that will serve as their motivation, kumbaga ba. Kinakailangan natin silang motivate for them to excel more. So, that is the 3 primary laws that Thorndike's introduced. I hope you have learned something today, and that ends our report.
To sum up our discussion, through his study on animal behavior and the learning process of cats, Thorndike founded the theory of connectionism. Connectionism theory is the work of the American psychologist Edward Thorndike that is based on the principle of active learning, which says that learning is a product between stimulus and response. A stimulus is something that causes a reaction, while a response is a reaction to a stimulus. This work led to Thorndike's laws, and those are the law of effect, law of readiness, and law of exercise. According to these laws, learning is achieved when an individual is able to form associations between a particular stimulus and a response. That's all for our discussion. Thanks for listening.